$17. That's all Rowan Rivera had left in the world when her knees hit cold marble at 2:47 in the morning and she made the choice that would change everything. Thunder rattled the chandeliers above her head. The sound came again, deep and rolling, shaking the crystal until it sang like 100 tiny bells about to shatter. The Calabrese mansion stretched around her in shadows and silver, white marble floors so polished you could see the reflection of her own blood streaking across them, a dark brushstroke against all that wealth and perfect emptiness. She had stumbled through the service entrance 3 minutes earlier, her throat marked with bruises shaped like fingers, her left eye swollen completely shut. The blood seeping through her torn nanny uniform came from the cut on her neck where his hands had pressed, where Anthony Marchetti's rage had left its signature written in broken skin. She couldn't breathe right. Every time she inhaled, pain shot through her ribs like lightning. The hallway was supposed to be empty at this hour. The family slept in rooms on the 3rd floor. The staff had been dismissed for the evening. Rowan moved through the darkness like a ghost, pressing her back against the walls, trying to reach the converted closet on the 2nd floor that passed for her bedroom. She just needed to reach it. Just needed to close the door and sit in that 4x6 space and figure out how to survive the next 5 days. But then voices came around the corner. Male voices, urgent and low. Footsteps. Heavy. Moving fast. She pressed herself into an alcove, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The footsteps grew louder. 2 men came into view first, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark suits that probably cost more than 3 months of her salary. Between them, they carried a 3rd man. Rocco. She recognized him from the rare time she had seen him in the kitchen, always polite, always moving with the careful respect of someone who understood the hierarchy of this house. Now Rocco's left shoulder bloomed with blood. Dark blood, soaking through his white dress shirt, dripping onto the marble floor in a rhythm that matched her own frantic heartbeat. His face had gone the color of old paper. And then Nicholas Calabrese stepped around the corner behind them. He was tall. 6'3", maybe taller, with shoulders that seemed to fill the hallway. His dark hair was disheveled, falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger than his 34 years, almost vulnerable if not for the expression in his eyes. Those eyes were the color of storm water, and right now they held the particular hollow ache of a man who had just lost something he could never recover. He wore an open white shirt, expensive, handmade, probably Italian silk, with the top 3 buttons undone. The shirt had been pristine once. Now it carried the stains of the night, small darknesses that told a story she didn't understand. His movements were controlled, each step deliberate, each gesture economical. He moved like a general surveying a battlefield, or like a man who had learned long ago that wasting energy on anything unnecessary was a luxury he could not afford. His eyes were looking forward, toward Rocco, toward the blood. He did not see her in the alcove. She could have stayed there. Should have stayed there. Witnesses disappeared in houses like this. She had heard the stories in the kitchen, the careful whispers between staff members about people who had seen things they shouldn't have seen, people who vanished without explanation. The smart thing was to press deeper into the shadow and forget she had ever seen this moment. But Rocco's legs buckled. The 2 men caught him before he fell, but for a moment his full weight hung between them, and she saw his face twist with pain. She saw him look down at his own blood like he didn't recognize it, like he was watching it happen to somebody else. Something in her chest broke open. She stepped out of the alcove. "Here," she said. Her voice came out raw, shattered like glass. "Put him down. Now." All 3 men turned to look at her. The 2 lieutenants exchanged a glance. Their hands moved toward their jackets in perfect synchronization, the movement of men trained to respond to threats with violence. Nicholas raised one hand. A small gesture. The movement of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. The hand stopped. The men waited. "The wound," Rowan said, and she was already moving forward, already kneeling down beside Rocco as they lowered him to the marble floor. "How long has it been bleeding?" "Who are you?" one of the men asked. His voice was sharp, suspicious. She didn't answer. She was already tearing at her nanny uniform, ripping a long strip from the hem of her skirt. Her hands shook as she pressed the fabric against Rocco's shoulder, applying pressure in the way she had learned years ago in a Red Cross certification course she had taken when she still believed her life might include a future with health insurance and job security. "Pressure here," she said, positioning Rocco's own hand over the wound. "Don't move it. Keep pressing." "How did this happen?" "That's not your concern," the second man said. But Nicholas didn't speak. He was looking at her. Really looking at her. At the bruises on her throat. At her swollen eye. At the blood that wasn't all hers. At the way her torn uniform exposed the lattice of old scars crisscrossing her ribs, scars that had nothing to do with tonight and everything to do with the life she had survived before. "Call an ambulance," Rocco gasped. "Not the hospital. The clinic. Russo's clinic. You know." "We know," Nicholas said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Franco, get him to the car. Take him to Russo's. Don't let him die." Franco nodded and hauled Rocco to his feet, and then they were moving again, the wounded man between them, leaving only blood on the marble and the lingering smell of copper and coming rain. For a moment, Rowan and Nicholas stood in the hallway alone. The silence pressed against her eardrums. Even the thunder seemed distant now, muffled by the thickness of the night. She could feel her pulse in her throat, right where the bruises were, right where his hands had left their mark earlier. She should run. She should go to her room and lock the door and pray that he didn't ask questions about what she had seen. But something kept her standing there. "You're bleeding," he said. "Yes." "Not from the wound on his shoulder." "No." He stepped closer. The air between them seemed to shift, to become something with weight and texture. She could smell him, the expensive cologne and the sharp, metallic scent of violence and sweat. His eyes moved across her face with the intensity of a man trying to read something written in a language he was still learning. "Who did this?" he asked. She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. If she opened her mouth, she would tell him about the $17 in her pocket, about the 5 days, about the debt that belonged to someone else but had her name written across it like a life sentence. She would tell him about Anthony Marchetti's hands and his demands and the way he had looked at her when she refused him, like she had personally insulted his entire family line. "My name is Nicholas Calabrese," he said. "This is my house. You work here." It wasn't a question. He knew who she was. Of course he did. He knew everything that happened within these walls. "I work for your family," she said carefully. Her voice barely trembled. "As a nanny for your niece." "You're the one who reads to Lily," he said. "The one she asks for when she has nightmares." Rowan's throat closed. She hadn't known that he paid attention to things like that. Nicholas Calabrese, who controlled a network of businesses that stretched across 3 states, who made decisions about money and territory and life and death, she hadn't imagined he would notice which staff member put his niece to sleep. "Yes," she said. "She loves you," he said. "She told me last week that you're the only one who doesn't look sad when you look at her." The words landed like a punch. Rowan felt her knees weaken. "The servants' staircase is 3 doors to your left," Nicholas said, stepping back. "Go to your room. Wash the blood. Change your clothes. In the morning, you will act as though none of this happened. You saw nothing. You heard nothing. You were asleep in your room from midnight until the sun came up. Do you understand?" "Yes." "And Rowan?" He said her name like he had known it for years. "Whoever did that to your throat. They are going to answer for it." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing on the marble, leaving her standing alone in the hallway with the thunder rolling overhead and the taste of copper on her tongue. She didn't move for a long time. The storm outside pressed against the windows. The chandeliers trembled. And Rowan Rivera, with $17 in her pocket and $47,000 owed to a man with violent hands, realized that something had just shifted in ways she didn't yet understand. She didn't know that in the basement of this very mansion, Nicholas Calabrese's own brother was being interrogated about his betrayal, about the family secrets he had sold to rivals for money, about the choice Nicholas had made only hours ago to let loyalty and mercy become the same word. She didn't know that the federal agents who had been tracking Nicholas Calabrese for 2 years had finally gathered enough evidence, and that the raid was coming within the week. She didn't know that Anthony Marchetti's plan to ensure her desperation spiraled into criminality was already in motion, papers being filed with corrupt officers, a trap being constructed around her with mathematical precision. But what she did know, as she climbed the servants' staircase with shaking hands, was that a man who controlled death had just decided, for reasons she couldn't fathom, that she was worth saving. The storm continued overhead. The chandeliers sang their fragile song. And somewhere in the sleeping mansion, a child named Lily dreamed of the woman who read her stories, the only person in her world who didn't look sad when she looked at her. The converted closet room was 7 feet by 9 feet. 1 window. A single bed pushed against the wall. A sink in the corner with water that ran rust-colored in the morning. Rowan Rivera sat on the edge of that bed at 4:30 in the morning, her hand shaking as she held the letter. $47,000. The numbers blurred and refocused. 47,000. Casino debts incurred by Marcus, her ex-boyfriend, who had used her name on loan documents she never signed. Who had taken her identity like it was a coat that belonged to him. Who had disappeared 2 years ago, leaving her with the wreckage of his addiction and the mathematical certainty of her own destruction. 5 days to pay. She opened her wallet. $17. 2 5s, a 10, and 7 singles, folded into the billfold like they were precious, like they mattered, like they could bridge the gap between survival and the edge of the abyss. She did the math again because the math was all she had left. 47,000 divided by 5 days. $9,400 per day. She was making $840 every 14 days as a live-in nanny for a family that barely knew her name. The impossibility of it sat in her chest like a stone. Rain began against the small window, soft at first, then harder, drops hitting the glass like tiny fists demanding entry. Downstairs, the Calabrese mansion was still sleeping. The marble halls were silent. The chandeliers were dark. And in this 7 by 9 closet, Rowan Rivera counted her money again because counting was the only thing left to do. The letter slipped from her hands and fell to the floor. The sender's address was embossed in gold, Anthony Marchetti. A name that meant danger. A man with connections to the underworld, to people who didn't accept late payments or hardship cases or excuses about identity theft and abusive relationships. A man who collected debts the way other men collected art. At 6:15, she heard movement in the house. Small footsteps. Lily was awake. Rowan folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and buried it beneath her 2 changes of clothes at the bottom of the single drawer that was hers. Then she smoothed her uniform, grey cotton with the Calabrese crest stitched in white thread, and climbed the servants' staircase to the 3rd floor. Lily's room was painted soft yellow. Stuffed animals sat in careful rows on shelves. The girl herself was already in her wheelchair, the motorized one that her parents had purchased but never learned how to operate, the one that cost more than Rowan's annual salary. Lily was 6 years old with dark hair and eyes that saw everything, eyes that knew, somehow, that Rowan was different from the other adults in her life. "Good morning, baby," Rowan said, and her voice was a different voice now, the voice she kept for Lily. Soft. Full of something that wasn't pretending. "Vi," Lily said. That was her name for Rowan, short for Vivienne, the name Rowan had used once, years ago, before everything broke. "Vi, look what I made." She held up a crayon drawing. 2 figures holding hands. One tall, one small. Both smiling. "That's you and me," Lily said. Rowan's chest tightened. She took the drawing carefully, as if it were made of glass, as if one careless movement could shatter it. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Absolutely beautiful. Are you sad today?" Lily asked. The perceptiveness of children. Like they could see through skin and bone straight to the terror living underneath. No, Rowan lied. Not sad. Just thinking about something. Think about happy things, Lily said. That's what my last nanny said. Think about happy things and sad things go away. Her last nanny. The one before Rowan. The one who had left without notice, without explanation, just like they all did eventually. This child, with her disability and her endless need for patience and her parents who treated her like a beautiful object they'd purchased but couldn't quite figure out, wore people out. Rowan had lasted longer than the others, almost 2 years now. She intended to last longer still. But the letter underneath her clothes said otherwise. The morning moved forward the way mornings do. Breakfast for Lily, soft scrambled eggs and toast cut into triangles because Lily had opinions about triangle toast versus square toast. Physical therapy exercises that Rowan had learned from videos because Lily's parents employed a physical therapist once a month, and Rowan had memorized every movement. Gentle stretches. Gentle rotations. Lily's small legs worked against the resistance of muscle and time, and Rowan counted out the seconds like prayers. 1, she whispered. 2. 3. You're so strong, baby. So strong. At 2 in the afternoon, Lily's parents returned from lunch. Her mother paused in the doorway, a woman named Victoria who wore clothes that cost more than Rowan's monthly rent and who looked at Lily with the expression of someone observing an interesting problem. Her father was already on his phone, conducting business, conducting life, barely registering that his daughter existed. We're going out again, Victoria said. Some people from the club. We won't be back until late. That's fine, Rowan said. We'll have dinner together and get ready for bed. Whatever you think is appropriate. Victoria turned away, already forgetting them both. The evening came. Dinner was chicken and vegetables that Rowan cut into small pieces. A bath where Rowan supported Lily's small body in the warm water, watching her face relax, watching the tension of the day drain away. And then the ritual that came after, Lily's wheelchair positioned beside her bed, Lily's small body lifted with careful hands and placed beneath soft sheets. What story tonight? Rowan asked. The one with the girl in the castle. The one with the nice prince. Rowan opened the book. Her voice became a story voice, a voice that knew about enchantment and rescue and the kind of love that didn't demand anything back. She read about a girl who was lost, who was found, who was chosen. She read about love as choice, not accident. She read until Lily's eyes grew heavy and her breathing deepened into sleep. When she was sure the child was dreaming, Rowan leaned down and pressed her forehead against Lily's hair. One long breath. At 10:30 that night, Rowan put on her waitress uniform, black pants, white shirt, black shoes with scuffs that wouldn't come clean, and caught the late bus to the Grand Marquis Hotel on the north side of Chicago. The hotel was all chrome and glass and towering ambition, a place where people conducted business that wasn't legal and pleasure that wasn't innocent. The staff entrance was in the back, a single door that opened onto a narrow hallway that smelled like cleaning solution and something older, something that had seeped into the walls. Catherine Mercer was at the front desk. Catherine Mercer with her ice-colored eyes and her silver hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, Catherine Mercer with the diamond watch that caught the light like a weapon. She was 45 years old and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with kindness. She was the hotel manager, and she ruled her domain with the precision of someone who had studied cruelty and made it her specialty. "You're late," Catherine said, not looking up from her computer. "The bus was delayed," Rowan said. "I don't accept excuses." Catherine's eyes flicked upward. "There's a spill in room for 14. Clean it. Then the ballroom needs restocking. Then you'll cover the front desk from 1 to 4 a.m. Are we clear?" "Yes." "Yes what?" "Yes, I understand." Catherine smiled. It was a smile with no kindness in it. "Good. And Rowan?" "The tips yesterday were light. Very light. I'm wondering if you're skimming from the jar. I'm wondering if I need to let you go. I'm not stealing anything. I don't believe you." Catherine leaned back in her chair. But I'm going to give you another chance. Make yourself useful and maybe I won't file a report with the owner. Or maybe I will anyway. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Rowan moved through the hotel with her head down. She cleaned room 414, which had spilled red wine and broken glass and the remnants of an argument. She restocked the ballroom, napkins, glasses, stirrers, everything in its precise position. Her body moved while her mind calculated. She was earning $15 an hour. 14 hours a night, 3 nights a week. That was $630 a week. $47,000 divided by $630 was 74 weeks. More than a year of working like this every single night, with no mistakes, no sickness, no breaks. She would never make the deadline. At 1 in the morning, she was alone at the front desk. The hotel hummed around her, elevator bells, distant laughter from the bar, the sound of ice in expensive glasses. She was alphabetizing the message slips when the storage room door opened. Anthony Marchetti stepped through. He was 38 years old and handsome in the way that predators are handsome, carefully groomed, expensive cologne, a suit that cost more than Rowan's annual salary. Gold rings on both hands. A smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that told you everything you needed to know about what he was willing to do. Rowan, he said. Her name in his mouth sounded like a threat. Mr. Marchetti. Her hands were shaking. She put them beneath the desk. 5 days, he said. How's the fundraising going? I have some money set aside. I'm working extra shifts. You have some money set aside. He laughed. It was a sound without humor. That's sweet. Really. But let me be clear about what 5 days means. 5 days means I stop being patient. 5 days means my associates start having conversations with you about payment arrangements. Do you understand what those conversations look like? She didn't answer. He leaned forward. His cologne was overwhelming. I asked you a question. Yes, she whispered. I understand. Good. He reached out. His hand caught her wrist. His fingers were cold. Or we could work something else out. Something mutually beneficial. You're a pretty girl, Rowan. Wasted as a maid. I could give you an opportunity. Real money. All that debt just gone. She pulled her hand back. His grip was tight enough that she felt the bones in her wrist shift. Let go of me. Or what? His smile widened. You'll call the police? Tell them what? That I'm collecting a debt your boyfriend incurred using your name. He released her. Think about it. The offer expires in 5 days. Just like everything else in your sad little life. He turned and walked out of the hotel like he owned it. Like he owned her. Rowan stood behind the desk with her heart hammering against her ribs. Her wrist ached where his fingers had been. She looked at the phone on the counter and thought about calling someone, the police, a lawyer, someone, but who would listen to a woman with $17 in her pocket and no one to vouch for her? Who would believe her over a man with resources and connections and the kind of smile that made judges comfortable? The clock on the wall read 1:15. She had 4 days and 23 hours left. At dawn, she caught the bus back to the Calabrese mansion. Her body was running on coffee and terror. Her mind was doing mathematics that had no solution. She climbed the servants' staircase and found Lily already awake, sitting in her wheelchair by the window, watching the sun rise over Chicago. Good morning, Lily said. Did you have a good night? Rowan knelt down and pulled the drawing from her pocket, the one Lily had made, the one with the 2 figures holding hands. She had carried it with her through the night shift, through the humiliation, through the threat. It had sat beside her at the front desk like a small rebellion against everything that was trying to destroy her. I had the best night, Rowan said. Because I was thinking about this. About you. About us. Lily reached out and took Rowan's face in her small hands. You're my favorite person in the whole wide world. You're mine too, baby. And in that moment, with this child's hands on her face and the morning light touching her hair, Rowan Rivera made a decision. She didn't know how she was going to do it. She didn't know if it was possible. But she knew that Anthony Marchetti would never touch this little girl, that no one would ever take Lily from her if she had anything to do with it, that this child would be safe because Rowan would make her safe. Even if it meant walking straight into the darkness. The specialist's words hung in the hallway like a death sentence. Experimental gene therapy. $48,000. Insurance won't touch it. Her spinal cord is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. Without intervention, her mobility will continue to decline. Rowan stood outside Lily's room, her hand pressed against the cool doorframe, listening to the parents' response through the cracked door. Too expensive, the mother said. Not worth it. The father didn't even respond. He was already scrolling through his phone, already moving on to the next thing that demanded his attention. Rowan's heart fractured into pieces she didn't know she had left. That night, in the converted closet that served as her bedroom, she researched the treatment on her phone. The number swam before her eyes. $48,000. She had $17 in her pocket. $47,000 owed to Anthony Marchetti in 4 days. $48,000 for Lily's surgery. The math was a language that only spoke one word: impossible. She held her mother's gold locket, the only thing of real value she owned, and pressed it against her heart. Thunder growled in the distance. The humid August night wrapped around the city like a living thing, sticky and suffocating. At the Grand Marquis Hotel, where Rowan picked up overnight shifts at minimum wage and tips that never materialized, the air conditioning was broken. Guests complained to Catherine Mercer, the manager. Catherine smiled and did nothing. The night shift staff, Rowan among them, suffered in silence. At 11 o'clock, Anthony Marchetti arrived. He moved through the lobby like he owned it, his linen shirt open at the collar, gold chains catching the light. Catherine Mercer appeared from her office immediately, her smile radiant, her eyes soft. She touched his arm. She laughed at something he said. She glanced at Rowan behind the front desk with an expression that said everything: "This man is mine. You are nothing." Rowan kept her head down and processed credit cards. At 1:30 in the morning, Marchetti found her in the 4th-floor storage hallway. She was restocking linens when she heard the elevator ding. When she turned, he was already walking toward her, and her body knew before her mind caught up. "We need to talk about your debt," he said. "I'm working on it," Rowan said. Her voice shook. "I've got 4 days. I'm going to find a way. Are you?" He stepped closer. "Because Catherine tells me you've been making new friends. Friends with resources. Friends who think they can pay your debts like you belong to them now." "I don't." His hand closed around her throat. The world compressed into the pressure of his fingers, the wall against her back, the smell of his cologne mixed with whiskey and something darker. She clawed at his wrist. She tried to scream, but the sound died in her crushed windpipe. He hit her. Once across the face. Her eye exploded in white pain and flooded with blood. Again. Her legs buckled. "You think you have a choice?" His voice was venom. "You think anyone's going to save you? You're nobody, Rowan. Remember that." He released her. She fell to her knees, gasping, tasting copper and terror. Her eye was already swelling shut. Her throat burned where his hands had left marks shaped exactly like fingers. She ran. Down the service stairs, vision swimming, her body screaming. She made it to the employee exit and burst into the humid night, running without direction, running until her lungs felt like they were tearing apart. At 2:47 in the morning, she stumbled through the service entrance of the Calabrese mansion. Thunder cracked directly overhead. The rain that had been threatening all night finally broke, and the sky opened like a wound. She was soaked, bleeding, her eye swollen nearly shut, her throat decorated with bruises that would take 2 weeks to fade. She collided with Nicholas Calabrese in the marble hallway. He was emerging from his study, still dressed despite the hour, his white shirt stained with blood that wasn't his own. Behind him, two men were helping a third man, Rocco, his shirt torn, a bullet wound in his shoulder, toward the medical room. Everything stopped. Nicholas Calabrese, 6 feet 2 inches tall, broad across the shoulders, with dark eyes that held the weight of 1,000 decisions made without hesitation, looked at the bleeding woman in the hallway and saw something that made his expression shift. "What happened to you?" His voice was quiet. It was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. Rowan couldn't speak. Her throat was destroyed. Instead of waiting for an answer, Nicholas turned to Franco. "Get her to the medical room. Behind Rocco's. Now." But Rowan moved. She didn't run. She looked at the wounded man, Rocco, she would learn, and she knelt down beside him. Her hands, shaking violently, found the wound and pressed her torn uniform sleeve against it. "Pressure," she whispered, her broken voice barely audible over the rain hammering against the windows. "You have to apply pressure." Rocco's eyes widened. The men exchanged looks. In 15 years, they had never seen anyone stand when they should run. Never seen anyone give when they should take. Nicholas watched her, this small, bleeding woman tending his wounded soldier with steadiness that came from somewhere deeper than survival instinct. "Get her cleaned up," he said. "Get her safe." The medical room was sterile and white and filled with equipment that cost more money than Rowan had seen in her entire life. A doctor, someone on Nicholas's personal payroll, treated her injuries with efficiency. Ice on the swollen eye. Photographs of the throat bruises. Antibiotics spread across the cuts on her palms and knees. Nicholas entered while they were wrapping her wrist. She flinched. He stopped in the doorway, reading her fear the way a predator reads prey, and something in his chest tightened. "Who did this?" She shook her head. "Rowan." Her name in his mouth sounded like a question. "Who hurt you?" And something broke inside her. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the impossible math that had been grinding her down for months. Maybe it was this man, dangerous, powerful, everything she should fear, asking as if he actually cared. "Anthony Marchetti," she whispered. "He's a loan shark. I owe him $47,000. I have 4 days and a little over $17. He cornered me. When I said no, he..." She touched her throat. "He made it clear that I don't have a choice." Nicholas pulled a chair closer and sat down, his eyes level with hers. "Tell me everything." She told him. The ex-boyfriend who used her identity to fund his gambling addiction. The debt she inherited through no fault of her own. The job at the hotel where she worked 14-hour shifts for tips that never came. Catherine Mercer protecting Marchetti because he paid her protection money. The 5-day deadline that now had 4 days left. The impossible numbers. Always the impossible numbers. 47,000, Nicholas said. It wasn't a question. And $17, Rowan said. "That's all I have. That's all I have in the world." His jaw tightened. "You'll have what you need." "I can't accept." "You saved Rocco when you should have run," Nicholas said. His voice was steady, without inflection, stating fact. "That's not something I forget. That's not something that goes unpaid." Morning came grey and uncertain. Rowan returned to the mansion, terrified that the parents would have discovered her absence, but they were still sleeping, indifferent, wealthy in their disconnection from the world. Lily was awake and waiting, sitting in her wheelchair by the window as the sun rose over Chicago like a promise no one had asked for. "Did you have a good night?" Lily asked. Rowan knelt down and pulled the drawing from her pocket, the one Lily had made of 2 figures holding hands. She had carried it through the double shift, through the hotel hallway, through the walk home, holding it like a talisman. "I had the best night," Rowan said, "because I was thinking about this. About you. About us." Lily reached out and took Rowan's face in her small hands. You're my favorite person in the whole wide world. The words landed like an anchor in Rowan's chest. My favorite. Chosen. Wanted. That afternoon, Nicholas appeared in the kitchen while Rowan prepared Lily's dinner. The parents were in Milan. They were always in Milan or Paris or somewhere that required their absence. The 47,000, Nicholas said. It's handled. Rowan turned, wooden spoon still in her hand. What? It's taken care of. You're free. That's not, you can't just. I can, he said. I did. And there's something else. He set a folder on the counter. Inside were images of experimental treatment protocols. Medical diagrams. Cost breakdowns. Lily's condition. The therapy she needs. $48,000. It's also handled. Rowan couldn't breathe. Why? The word came out broken. Because someone should, Nicholas said. Because you're doing this alone and you shouldn't have to. That night, at the hotel, Anthony Marchetti cornered her near the back office. Catherine Mercer watched from behind her desk, filing her nails, unbothered. 3 days, Marchetti said. You think someone's going to save you? You're mine, Rowan. Mine until that debt is paid. Rowan's hands trembled. But she didn't back away. I'm not anyone's. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. We'll see about that. 2 days before the deadline, Officer Dennis Cole appeared at the mansion's front door with an arrest warrant. The false theft report Catherine Mercer had filed was official now. $3,000 allegedly stolen from the hotel. The signature forged by a man with a badge and no conscience. Cole climbed the marble steps with the arrogance of someone who believed he was untouchable. Nicholas was waiting in the foyer. She's coming with me, Cole said. Nicholas smiled. It was the kind of smile that made experienced men nervous. I don't think she is, he said quietly. Outside, thunder rolled across the Chicago sky like drums announcing war. The marble foyer of the Calabrese mansion fell absolutely silent. Officer Dennis Cole stood frozen, warrant still in his trembling hand, as Nicholas Calabrese extended a sealed envelope across the distance between them like a blade wrapped in ice. Open it, Nicholas said. His voice carried no anger. That made it worse. Cole's fingers shook as he broke the seal. Inside, photographs printed in crisp, devastating detail. Cole accepting cash from Anthony Marchetti outside a downtown hotel. Cole's signature on false arrest reports. Cole meeting with Catherine Mercer in parking garages at midnight. Bank records showing deposits that could not be explained by a police officer's salary. Witness statements from hotel employees describing threats, coercion, intimidation orchestrated by a man wearing a badge. The FBI has copies, Nicholas continued, his tone conversational, almost gentle. They have been building this case for 8 months. Every conversation you had with Marchetti. Every dollar that moved. Every false report filed. You can walk away now, Officer Cole. Right now. You get in your car and you drive away and you never come back to this address. Or you go downtown with Anthony Marchetti and you spend the next 20 years explaining to inmates why you sold your oath for cash. The warrant fell from Cole's hand and fluttered to the marble floor like a broken bird. He ran. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the foyer, then faded into the Chicago afternoon. The silence that replaced it was the silence of dominoes beginning to fall. That night, the rain came early. August turned violent. Thunder cracked across the sky like the earth splitting open, and Rowan sat on the back steps of the mansion in complete darkness, soaked through, trembling despite the heat. 1 day remained. 24 hours until Marchetti's deadline. The math was still impossible. Nicholas had erased the 47,000. He had paid for Lily's therapy. He had dismantled the threat of deportation, the threat of homelessness, the threat of everything collapsing. But accepting his help felt like replacing one chain with another. She reached for her mother's locket. The gold was cool against her palm. Inside, a photograph of a woman with Rowan's eyes, a woman who had worked 3 jobs and still lost everything anyway. The woman who had whispered to Rowan in the dark, "We survive. We do not give up. We do not belong to anyone." That was the code she had inherited. That was the only inheritance that mattered. The rain soaked through her shirt. It ran down her neck in rivers. She stood to leave, to walk away from the mansion, from Nicholas, from the impossible kindness that felt too much like ownership, when Lily's window lit up above her. The little girl was awake, frightened by the storm. Her small voice carried down through the humid darkness, "Rowan? Rowan, are you there?" Rowan's feet stopped moving. She stood in the rain, paralyzed between 2 truths, the independence her mother had taught her and the love she had chosen to give to a child who was not hers. She thought of Lily calling her name. She thought of Lily's hand in her hand. She thought of the way Lily's eyes lit up when she walked through the door. You cannot protect what you refuse to hold. Rowan turned and walked back inside. The next morning arrived with the clarity of reckoning. Rowan was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when the gates at the perimeter of the Calabrese property began to rattle. Violent. Deliberate. Anthony Marchetti's voice bellowed through the intercom system with the confidence of a man who believed his threats were law. $47,000, Rowan. Today. You have until sunset or I am coming through those gates myself. Security held him back, but he kept shouting, and with each word his desperation grew sharper. Catherine Mercer stood beside him on the street outside, perfectly composed in a cream-colored linen suit that cost more than Rowan's annual salary. Her diamond watch caught the sunlight like a weapon. She smiled with the cruelty of someone who believed the world was arranged in hierarchies and that she occupied the top. "Poor choices lead to poor outcomes, dear," Catherine called out, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You should have known better than to borrow money you could not repay. Everyone knows that." Nicholas emerged from the mansion. Behind him, the gates opened. But the men who stepped through wore black tactical vests marked with 3 letters, FBI. 12 federal agents moved like ghosts across the manicured lawn, each one carrying the weight of 8 months of investigation. Special Agent Marcus Chen stepped forward, his badge catching the morning light. He was a thin man with gray at his temples and the absolute certainty of someone who had spent his career dismantling operations built on corruption. "Anthony Marchetti, you are under arrest for extortion, racketeering, organized crime, conspiracy, and fraud," Agent Chen said, each charge landing like a hammer strike. "Catherine Mercer, you are under arrest for the same. Officer Dennis Cole is already in custody. Councilman Martin Mercer is already in custody. 6 additional individuals in your network are being arrested at this exact moment across the city." Marchetti's face transformed in seconds. The confidence drained away like blood from a wound. His hands began to shake. "You cannot do this," he said, but the conviction was gone. "You do not understand. I have connections. Important people. This is a mistake. We can make a deal. A deal can be arranged." 2 agents moved toward him with handcuffs. Marchetti backed away, his chest heaving, his eyes wide like an animal in a trap. When the cuffs clicked around his wrists, something inside him broke completely. He collapsed to his knees on the street in front of his own sedan, in front of news cameras that were already rolling, in front of the woman he had terrorized for weeks. He wept. Actual sobs racked through his chest. "Please," he gasped. "Please, I am begging you. We can fix this. I know people. I can pay. I can pay anything." The man who had marked Rowan's throat. The man who had delivered threats with the certainty of someone who believed himself untouchable. Reduced to pleading on a Chicago street at dawn. Catherine Mercer did not collapse. She stood perfectly straight as agents approached her, her composure a fortress even as they pulled her wrists behind her back. The handcuffs clicked into place and she lifted her chin. "This is a tremendous mistake," she said, her voice steady. "My husband is a public official. My family has Your husband is already downtown, Agent Chen interrupted. In the same vehicle Mr. Marchetti is being transported in. Your family connections just became your family liabilities. The news cameras captured every moment. The hotel manager led out in handcuffs. The diamond watch catching light as she was guided into the federal vehicle. The carefully constructed life crumbling in real time as broadcast helicopters circled overhead. 8 months, Agent Chen continued, almost conversationally. We have been building this case for 8 months. Employee theft. Wage fraud. Extortion networks running through for hotels across the Midwest. 12 victims came forward once the threat disappeared. 12 people who were too terrified to speak until now. Catherine's composure finally fractured. Her carefully arranged face twisted. You cannot broadcast this, she hissed at the cameras. I have rights. I have privacy rights. Turn those cameras off. But every news station in Chicago was streaming live. By noon, her image in handcuffs had been shared 40,000 times on social media. By evening, 2 million views. National news outlets picked up the story. The federal raid on the Calabrese mansion. The systematic dismantling of a corruption network that reached from street-level thugs all the way up to the police department and city council. The charges continued to unfold. Officer Cole pleading guilty to avoid the maximum sentence. Councilman Mercer facing ethics violations. The hotels raided, bank accounts frozen, evidence catalogued. The systematic destruction was not violent. It was thorough. It was legal. It was absolute. 40 years in federal prison for Catherine Mercer. 35 for Anthony Marchetti. 20 for Officer Cole. Death would have been too quick. Too easy. Too merciful. This way, they would have decades to remember what they had done. In the mansion's main room, Rowan watched the news broadcast with Nicola standing silently beside her. The television showed Marchetti being led into FBI headquarters, the footage repeating on every channel. Her throat bore no marks now. The bruises had faded. But she could still feel the weight of his hands. You did this, she whispered, understanding only now that he had been moving pieces into place long before the deadline arrived. You did it first, Nicholas said quietly. His voice carried no pride, no triumph. Just fact. You saved Rocco on the worst night of his life. You could have run. Instead you knelt down and stopped his bleeding. That choice started everything. She turned to face him. This man with dangerous hands and a code of honor written in blood and survival. This man who had dismantled an empire not through violence but through patience and evidence and the simple act of believing that a woman with $17 in her pocket deserved justice. The debt, she began. Erased, he said. Marchetti's entire operation is seized by federal order. The debt was illegal. It was always illegal. You are free, Rowan. Free. The word didn't feel real in her mouth. She had carried the weight of $47,000 for so long that freedom felt like weightlessness, like falling, like the moment after a storm breaks and you can finally breathe. Outside, the Chicago sky began to clear. The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and hope, a scent Rowan Rivera had learned to recognize in the 3 months since federal agents led Anthony Marchetti away in handcuffs. She sat in a chair upholstered in pale gray fabric, her fingers wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, watching the door where Dr. Patel would emerge with news about Lily's experimental treatment. 14 days had passed since the arrests. 14 days of Nicholas transferring $28,000 to Chicago's best pediatric facility without a single question, without a moment's hesitation. The woman who once counted coins to decide between food and electricity now sat in a waiting room where the chairs cost more than her old monthly rent. Footsteps approached from the corridor. Dr. Patel appeared in green scrubs, her clipboard held like a shield. Rowan's breath caught. This was the moment. This was when she learned if the impossible could actually bend. Lily responded beautifully to the first round, Dr. Patel said, sitting across from her. The inflammation markers are dropping. The nerve response tests show measurable improvement. I want to be cautious about guarantees, but we're seeing exactly what we hoped for. Rowan didn't cry. She had stopped crying somewhere around the 5th hospital stay, somewhere around the 3rd specialist who said a permanent like it was a diagnosis and not a prediction. But her hands shook as they held the coffee cup. Will she walk? Probably, Dr. Patel said. Not immediately. Not without ongoing sessions. But yes, Rowan. We believe she will walk. The word belief hung in the air between them, fragile as glass, solid as stone. Nicholas sat in that same waiting room 3 hours later, his presence filling the space like cold water. 6'2", shoulders broad beneath a charcoal suit that probably cost more than a year of her old salary. Dark eyes that had seen things that left marks. His hand found hers on the armrest. The treatment is working, Rowan said. Not a question. A prayer that had been answered. He nodded, his jaw tight. He'd been distant since the federal agents came, protective but careful, as if afraid that moving too close would fracture the fragile thing they were building. But now he turned to face her fully. When he spoke, his voice was rough, like gravel, like a man speaking about things that cost him something. I need to tell you something. About why I understood. About why I help children who aren't mine. She waited. This moment had the weight of a confession. I have a son, he said quietly. 7 years old now. Born with a severe developmental disability. The doctors used a word, irreversible. They said his life would be limited, constrained, permanent. The last word he spoke like a curse. They told me to accept it. Move forward. Start planning for institutions, for limited futures, for the life he wouldn't be able to live. Rowan's hand tightened on his. I spent 2 years and every resource I had trying to do the impossible. Insurance companies denied it. Specialists said the odds were less than 5%. Everyone told me to stop fighting, to accept what couldn't be changed. His eyes found hers. But I couldn't. He was my son. What happened? She whispered. A specialist in Boston. Gene therapy. Experimental. They said 5% chance of improvement. I took those odds. I took any odds. He paused. His voice roughened further, barely a whisper. It worked. Not completely. Not perfectly. But he walks now. He talks. He laughs. He is alive in ways they said were impossible. Rowan understood then why he had saved her, why he had saved Rocker that night in the mansion corridors, why he had built this empire and then bent it toward mercy. He understood what it meant to love a child enough to burn the world down for even the smallest chance. I see him on weekends, Nicholas continued. His mother kept him in Boston after we separated. But that's changing. There are lawyers working on custody. There are arrangements being made. He paused. He needs to know his father. And his father needs to know a woman brave enough to save a broken man's employee without knowing who that broken man was. In the hospital hallway, nurses moved past with clipboards and purpose. A child cried in a distant room. But in this moment, there was only the sound of 2 people breathing, understanding each other in the way that only happened when you had both loved someone enough to demand the impossible. 3 months later, the mansion's lawn stretched green beneath an October sky. Lily ran across it, clumsily, joyfully, her legs still uncertain but moving, moving. She wore a pink dress that caught the wind. She laughed, a sound like bells, a sound that meant survival. Rowan stood on the terrace beside Nicholas, her hand resting in his. She had stopped sleeping in the converted closet. Nicholas had insisted quietly and with the finality of a man accustomed to his decisions being absolute. She and Lily had rooms in the main house now. Real rooms. Rooms with windows that looked out at the city. You did this, Nicholas said, his eyes on Lily as she ran toward them, her form becoming steadier with each passing week. I paid for the treatment. But you did the impossible. You loved her when no one else would. You stayed when everyone else left. You made her believe she was worth fighting for. Nicholas's son visited that weekend. His name was Marco. 7 years old, with his father's dark eyes and a smile that suggested he didn't yet understand how close he'd come to a life prescribed by limitation. He and Lily played together in the mansion's gardens, two miracles that almost didn't happen, now laughing as if they'd always belonged to the same family. Rowan watched Nicholas with his son, patient, teaching him how to throw a baseball, his massive hands gentle around the small boy's shoulders. She saw the man behind the reputation. The father. The person willing to wage war against the impossible and somehow win. 1 year later, the evening before the wedding, Rowan stood alone in her room holding her mother's gold locket. The one she'd almost sold when the debt seemed insurmountable. The one Nicholas had told her to keep because some things weren't measured in dollars. Inside was a photograph so worn the faces were barely visible. Her mother. Someone who had loved her fiercely and left too soon. Someone who had taught her that staying meant everything. She thought of $17. She thought of $47,000 owed to a man who would spend 40 years in federal prison. She thought of Lily, who should have remained disabled forever but instead was learning to run. She thought of Nicholas, whose empire was being dismantled and rebuilt into something legitimate, something that would carry her name, the Rivera Foundation for Children's Medical Research. The ceremony happened on a Saturday morning in the mansion's gardens. Lily, now 8 years old and moving with only the faintest limp, threw rose petals as a flower girl. Marco, Nicholas's son, concentrated fiercely on carrying the rings. Rocco and Franco stood as witnesses, still slightly shocked that their boss had found someone capable of seeing past the crime, the blood, the complicated mathematics of survival into the wounded human underneath. Nicholas wore a suit that was simple by his standards, just charcoal and cream, expensive but understated. When he slipped the ring onto Rowan's finger, his voice steady, he spoke a vow that came from years of understanding what mattered. "I will stay when the storm arrives." Rowan's voice trembled as she answered, "I will help you weather it." They didn't kiss dramatically. There was no music swelling, no cinematic moment. Just the sound of children laughing, just the Chicago wind moving through the garden, just two people understanding that family wasn't always written in blood but in the choice to remain when everything else demanded departure. That evening, as sunset turned the sky gold, Rowan stood on the terrace with her new family, Nicholas beside her, Lily and Marco between them, holding both their hands. The city stretched beyond the mansion walls, the place where she'd once counted $17, where she'd once felt the debt like a noose, where she'd once believed impossible was permanent. Nicholas looked directly at her, his arm around her waist, and spoke words that held all the weight of redemption. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. The words would echo. They would become the thing people remembered. The moral that transcended the story itself, that belonging wasn't determined by circumstance or biology or the amount of money in your pocket. It was determined by choice. By staying. By refusing to accept what others called permanent. If this story moved your heart, please hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to remember that impossible odds are not the end of the story but the beginning. Subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow we're bringing you another story about people who refused to give up when the world said they should. Drop a comment telling us what you would risk everything for. We read every single one. This is about more than entertainment. It's about remembering that we all have the power to stay when the storm arrives. We wish all of you watching this good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.